Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, FreeSpeechTV, and podcast platforms. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world are overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On the series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, you'll hear conversations with change makers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week on Rising Up for Justice, EllenFlenniken, Chief Advocacy Officer at the Vera Institute of Justice, joins me. She's also Director of Vera Action. The Vera Institute is the oldest and largest criminal justice reform organization in the country, and Ellen comes to Vera from the ACLU, where she led the National Abuse of Power and Criminal Justice campaign teams as National Campaign Director there. Welcome to the program, Ellen.
Thanks so much, Sonali. Delighted to be here.
I have used Vera's research so many times over the years in stories I've written and interviews that I've prepared for. It's just been such an incredible resource. And of course, we'll get into that research, but that's the part that I see. How do you explain what Vera Institute does, what its main goals are?
Yeah, so you know Vera in a similar way that so many people do. And what we say is kind of our unique lane here is that we bring the data, the evidence, and the solutions to the fight to end mass incarceration and protect immigrant rights and build safe and thriving communities. So at Vera, as you mentioned, I lead the organization's advocacy team. So my team drives the work across policy, politics, and campaigns. And in our work, we really try to center the solutions that we offer on anti-racism, particularly given the ways in which the criminal justice systems and immigration systems operate on this history of racism and bias. So that's kind of the core of who we are as an organization. And my team in particular is focused on the politics of crime and safety, in addition to the policies that actually deliver safety and justice.
And how does Vera go about achieving these goals? I imagine that research that I was referring to is part of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we have different kinds of research. So research about what works to create safe communities. And there's so much evidence around these solutions, crisis response programs, so that there's the right responder when there's a mental health or addiction crisis that someone is experiencing, community violence intervention, so that you're seeing community members and police partner together to kind of address and respond to individuals who are most at risk of violence, for example. So that's kind of the solutions that we work to scale across the country to deliver safety, to deliver justice in our communities. And then in addition to kind of those policy interventions, we're also focusing, as I mentioned, on the politics of it. So kind of countering this conventional political wisdom that tough on crime is the only way to go and the only thing that wins elections. And we do some of that through kind of this vast amount of public opinion research that we fielded to show what the public actually wants on these issues and to help give politicians and policymakers the data and evidence so that they're able to navigate what is sometimes like tricky terrain for people in a way that they can feel confident about that, it's both good policy and good politics is what we often like to say.
This issue of safety and how it can be achieved is top of mind. And you're right, it comes up in election after election. And we constantly are told that if there's crime and if we want to reduce it, we need to invest in police. It becomes this knee-jerk reaction, this assumption. It's something that we just take for granted. But if we actually wanted to stop crime before it happened, how does police help, right? And so that's something that rarely gets addressed. That crime levels correlate much more heavily with inequality. We just don't see that. Is that something that Vera Institute digs into?
Yeah, so you are spot on here that if you just focus on or only experience the kind of political debate, it's really distorted. You would think that Americans overall are desperate for these tough on crime policies and more police and more prisons, but we know that's not the fact. We have spoken with voters. We've done all this research, particularly in battleground states. And what we found through this research is that voters actually believe that mass incarceration itself makes their communities less safe because they understand that it contributes to so many of the problems that lead to unsafe communities, like homelessness and poverty and drug and mental health challenges. And so what we are kind of offering to politicians and policymakers is that there is a different path forward. It's not just, you can either defund the police or back the blue. No, there's a different approach, a kind of serious about safety approach. Everybody wants to be safe in their communities. We all deserve to be safe in our communities. And the way that we achieve that is through preventing crime and breaking its cycle, investing in good schools and good jobs and affordable housing, mental health and addiction services. It's not through ramping up policing and punishment. That's not the approach that's going to create safer communities.
And investing in those things that actually keep us safe requires money. Where does the money come from, right? Because that is always the question that mayors, city mayors struggle with. And that's where that cry to defund the police really does come from, because defunding one thing is equivalent to funding the other thing. And they go hand in hand, the invest and divest part of it. And that too can be a challenge to sell, if you will, to the public. In 2020, there was a lot more buy-in for that idea when we saw the murders of George Floyd and the murders of other Black people, came to light before and after George Floyd's killing. And police have not actually stopped killing people, disproportionately Black people either, but public opinion has just gone back and forth. So I'm wondering how you fold in storytelling at Vera Institute and narrative building, because that seems to be such an important part of it.
Yeah, well, you've covered so much in that question. I mean, I think one thing that I would say first and foremost is mass incarceration and mass criminalization is extraordinarily expensive and ineffective. And so there's, really great examples of these safety solutions that actually save communities money. And you're talking about local leaders, and for them, they have to engage with crime and public safety. It's such a hyper local issue. And so a really good example of something that mayors and local leaders can do in their own communities that both saves money and improves outcomes is crisis response, for example. So what we know, police are not trained as social workers or mental health counselors, and most officers are going to tell you that themselves. And so when someone calls 911 because they're witnessing a mental health or an addiction crisis, that shouldn't be a police call. We should fund civilian first responders for those calls. And the evidence shows that they result in these real improvements in outcomes for communities and also real reductions in cost. I think another kind of example that folks are feeling really acutely right now in their communities, particularly big cities across the country, where National Guard and ICE have been deployed to their cities, is exactly what you're talking about. The Trump administration has said that they're deploying ICE and the National Guard because of crime fighting. But what we've actually seen, including in multiple independent studies, is that there's no measurable reduction in crime. As you mentioned, instead, what we're seeing is people who are being killed. There have been at least 11 fatal DHS and ICE shootings since January of 2025. Earlier this summer, we saw in Memphis 4 deaths in just the span of days. And that's obviously an immense and indefensible human cost. And there's also an immense and indefensible financial cost. These deployments have cost hundreds of millions of dollars and it's on track to grow into the billions. And that's money that could have been spent on what actually creates safe communities. But what we've seen is that the Trump administration instead is cutting funding $500 million, not $500,000, many times more, $500 million that they've cut in federal grants for community safety programs that actually work. So things like violence interruption and funding for mental health and addiction services, they are cutting funding for what works while funding things that are creating chaos and harm in our communities. And you also asked about narrative and storytelling. I mean, that is so central to everything that we do at Vera. This is not just about telling people about the data and the evidence, and that's not how people engage with issues of safety. People feel issues of safety really personally, whether they hear gunshots in their communities or they're just hearing these stories of crime on the local evening news every night. You've probably heard this old adage, if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, we've got kind of this inundation of these stories on local news that make people feel like their communities are not safe, even though we're actually in the middle of this historic crime decline. And so for us, when we're looking to transform the approach to criminal justice and immigration in this country, we have to shift the narrative around what creates safe communities and what doesn't. So storytelling is central to that. People speaking about their own personal experience, healthcare workers talking about the things that actually create healthy communities. That's really effective. Parents talking about what's important for them, their children, their communities, good schools, good jobs. All of that really impacts the way that people understand, see, and feel the issues of safety and justice.
And I just can't help but take a very brief aside to mention that we see, unfortunately, Hollywood over and over again tell the opposite story, tell the story that safety comes from policing. I just went to watch the new Spider-Man film with my family, and it made so much money. And the whole crux of that story is that local city police are the partners in crime, partners in crime, literally, but partner with the superheroes. Superheroes are the crime fighters. They all fight crime, but no one ever talks about why the crimes happen in Hollywood and how to prevent them. But cops are, there's basically propaganda, right? Our TV shows, our movies are rife with propaganda. Again, that's my aside. And certainly I hope that those who are the storytellers of Hollywood listening to this might start to work in better storylines, because that narrative shifting is important to saving lives. And so I want to ask you specifically about the research and about those beautiful maps that you have on Vera Institute's website. So for example, if people want to go and see in their own cities what incarceration looks like, what funding for police versus other things look like, how can they use Vera's research to start their own campaigns around crime prevention?
That's one I love, that you have been so engaged with these resources that my colleagues have created, and what you see as these beautiful maps highlighting the kind of real human harm of mass incarceration and mass criminalization, and also highlighting the kind of successes and these solutions that are working to create safe communities. That is the labor of really rigorous research that our teams have conducted, matched with, of course, how do you translate research like that into something that can be useful for advocates in their own communities. So that's part of our goal. Like, how do we provide kind of support all across the country to folks who are engaging in these justice campaigns in their own backyards? We find that research, the data, the evidence, the solutions are really effective in conversations with policymakers and leaders. It's so compelling. And at the same time, we caution folks to not lean too heavily into talking about statistics, particularly when they're engaging with the public. What we found, for example, is that the public often thinks that crime is increasing in the country, particularly when they're talking about the numbers or data around national crime trends rather than what they're experiencing in their own backyards. And some of this, Sonali, is exactly what you're talking about. It's about kind of the media and sensationalized like crime story narrative. It's that nightly news. It's the next door chatter that people all get consumed by. That all makes people feel like crime is actually a bigger issue nationally, or increasing nationally, when the reality is that it's decreasing. But what we know is that debating crime statistics with people does not work. As I said before, safety is something that people feel, and no amount of statistics is going to change that. Like, we have to meet people where they are. We have to listen to their concerns without dismissing them. People don't want to be told that they're wrong to be worried about their community. They want to be shown a clear path forward, an affirmative vision for the kind of safety that we want and the concrete steps to get there. And so our urging is, you've got to make sure you pair that data and evidence with kind of complementary storytelling, narrative change work that meets people where they are, and doesn't kind of try to debate the facts.
That is such a great point. And I think especially politicians ought to take note. They think that it's either the only choices are to boost policing, or to completely defund the police and not say anything more about what that would replace. And so they, of course, choose boost policing, when really what is needed is articulating the vision of what it is you want society to look like. I think we see New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani having done that quite effectively, and he's engaged in trying to put together a community safety department, and has been very critical of police in the past, but is actually putting money towards those safety issues. Remains to be seen how effective he'll be, but certainly he is trying something different that other politicians haven't tried. I want to change tack, Ellen, and go back to asking you about Vera's work, not only in what you're doing today, but how it started, because some of the things that I love to dig into in these conversations is, where do these wonderful organizations that are doing this important work that people rely on, where did they get their start? How long ago? What sparked them? And on your website, you have an intriguing story about a dinner party that sparked the origins of Vera Institute. So go back in time and take us to where it first came about.
Sure. So the Vera Institute was actually started in 1961. As you mentioned in the opening, we are the oldest national criminal justice organization in the United States. And it started first to kind of respond to and fight the injustice of a bail system in New York City that locked people up simply for being poor. And those origins have remained true in Vera's work to this day. We continue to work to ensure that wealth does not determine people's freedom. One of the other kind of interesting pieces of the Vera origin story going back to the 1960s is how much the reality of mass incarceration has changed in the decades since. I mean, back in the 60s, at that point, US incarceration rates weren't far off from many of our peers. So if you look at, the UK or France or Germany, we were really on par with them. And then that started to change in a really intense way, starting in the 70s, accelerating in the 80s. And now, I mean, I think most folks, listeners, would know that the U.S. unfortunately remains the number one incarcerator in the entire world, and we've got just about 2 million people behind bars in the United States today. Fortunately, that's down a bit from the peak in kind of 2008, 2009. We had between 2.3 and 2.4 million Americans behind bars in the United States. And what that translates to in people's lives is that it's deeply personal for so many Americans, because 1 in 2 people in the United States has actually either experienced incarceration themselves or through a loved one. And so, those roots of ensuring that money doesn't determine freedom remain true today. We continue to work to ensure that there are fewer people in jails and prisons and immigration detention centers. This is all interconnected. And also, if people are in jails and prisons, that they're treated with dignity. I mean, the conditions can be so grim and difficult for folks behind bars, whether immigration detention or in prisons and jails across the country. And so that's a key piece of the work as well.
What are the main obstacles that Vera Institute faces? I mean, you're not an organizing necessarily on the ground type, maybe more traditional social justice organizations might do. You work in policy, you work in research. What are the biggest obstacles that you face to your work?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a bit, but just the kind of conventional political wisdom that tough on crime is what works and what appeals to voters and wins re-election. That is a huge challenge that we face. And, to open up more space for us on the policy front, it's important that we address the politics of it as well. We also are dealing with this really kind of complicated and multidimensional web of incarceration and criminalization in this country. And so we actually have to work at all levels of government in order to carry out our mission. There are 18,000 police departments across the country. There are more than 6,000 jails and prisons across the country. There's no national or federal fix to ending mass incarceration. We have to work at the local, the state, and the federal level simultaneously, which, particularly right now, that's hard given kind of the onslaught that we're seeing of these federal threats and these attacks, both from the administration themselves, but we're even having to navigate challenges congressionally right now, where one of our biggest fights right now is around this bill that's in Congress. It's called CORCA, which is the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. And it's really this Trojan horse bill that is purported on its face to be about combating organized retail theft. But what it would actually do is drastically expand DHS, so Department of Homeland Security, and ICE's authority to surveil the public and to access people's data. So one of the things that we've been doing is we have been leading the opposition to that bill alongside more than 130 organizations who have urged Congress to say no. So as you note, we are not a grassroots organizing organization, but we collaborate with partners who can mobilize, the masses to reach out to their elected officials and urge Congress to vote no. So folks like the ACLU and Amnesty International, NAACP, alongside our close partners, National Immigration Law Center, who have been leading this fight, pushing against CORCA, and really trying to carry this message that given DHS and ICE's violence and abuses of power, our elected leaders have to hold the line here and not hand them more power to violate our rights and liberties.
Well, I could talk to you all day, but I have to let you go as we're out of time. Let me wrap up by asking you to give out contact information where people can find out about Vera's work and also how they can support it, how ordinary people can back the work that you do.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for your work to shine a light on advocates and justice reformers all over the country. I think my number one most urgent ask for folks is please call and email your senators and urge them to vote no on CORCA. If they're in their home districts right now in August, and if they've got a town hall, show up and ask a question. Encourage them to vote no. And if you want to support our work, if you want to learn more about the data, the evidence, the solutions that you are bringing up, to sign up for our emails and to see our action alerts, you can see all of that information at our website, vera.org. So that's vera.org. And we'd love to have you as part of the movement to end mass incarceration.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for joining us, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
My guest has been EllenFlenniken, Chief Advocacy Officer at the Vera Institute of Justice and Director of Vera Action, and this is Rising Up for Justice. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series, exclusive to viewers of FreeSpeechTV and subscribers of my long-standing program Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.